The illegitimate son's oath. He clashed with the heir to protect his childhood love. He learned early that some children were born under chandeliers and others under whispers. He was the second kind. The boy with no surname spoken aloud. The boy who walked the estate like a shadow, tolerated but never welcomed. The boy whose existence was a reminder of a mistake no one dared name. He stood barefoot in the cold stone corridor, listening through the crack of a heavy oak door, while voices argued on the other side. Smoke from the fireplace curled beneath the threshold, carrying the scent of burning wood and tension. He pressed one ear to the wood, heart thumping, as he tried to understand a world that used him, without ever including him. "He'll stay until he's of age," a deep voice snapped. The voice of the lord of the estate, the man the boy was forbidden to call father. "And then?" another demanded. "And then he'll be placed elsewhere, apprenticed, sent to the military, hidden, just like all problems that cannot be erased." The words struck him harder than a blow. Hidden. Problem. Unwanted. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from making a sound. He had learned long ago that the first rule of surviving in this house was silence. The second was obedience. The third was invisibility. He backed away from the door, the flames inside casting long shadows that stretched toward him like accusing fingers. His chest tightened, but he refused to cry. Crying made noise. Crying revealed you, and boys like him could not afford to be seen. He walked down the servants' staircase, small feet tapping softly against the cold steps. Below, the estate rumbled with morning activity. Pots clanged, brooms swept, boots stomped. Servants flowed around him like a river around a stone, neither cruel nor kind. To them, he was simply another task to be tolerated. A sharp whistle cut through the air. "Oi boy, bring this to the stables." A stable hand tossed him a bundle of ropes. He caught them without complaint. Running errands was better than being locked in the unused room they called his quarters. Better than listening to doors shut in his face. Better than hearing people whisper about the wife the Lord betrayed, the scandal that nearly ruined them, the illegitimate child they could never publicly acknowledge. He crossed the courtyard, wind biting his cheeks, when he heard it. A soft voice humming gently behind one of the wagons. Curious despite himself, he peeked around the wooden wheel. A girl sat on the ground, braiding wildflowers into a small crown. Her hair was messy from the wind, her apron dusty, and her shoes scuffed, but she smiled as though the world belonged to her. She lifted her head when she sensed him. "You're the boy who never talks," she said simply. He stiffened, wary. "I talk." "To who?" He opened his mouth, but no answer came. She laughed, not unkindly, but with a warmth he had never been offered. "My name is Ilara." He blinked. No one ever gave him their name. Names were privileges. Names were invitations. Names meant someone saw you. "I don't have a name," he murmured. "That's a lie," she said, standing and brushing grass off her skirt. "Everyone has a name. They just don't say yours." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But if you tell me, I'll say it." He hesitated. His name felt fragile, like a secret too delicate to share. But something in her eyes, fearless, honest, loosened the knot in his chest. "Kale," he whispered. Her smile deepened. "Kale." She said it again, as if giving the name back to him polished and whole. "There. Now someone in this place sees you." He swallowed hard, emotion choking him unexpectedly. She lifted the flower crown. "Want it?" "I'm a boy," he muttered, confused. "It's not for wearing," she said. "It's to remind you that something beautiful can still belong to you." No one had ever spoken to him that way. No one had ever given him anything. No one had ever looked at him with anything but irritation or pity. But she did. That day, in the chill of early spring, with wildflowers trembling in her small hands, Something unshakable rooted itself inside him. A promise he did not yet know how to name. Years later, he would understand. It was the beginning of an oath. An oath born in the shadows. An oath forged in silence. An oath made for her. Kyle grew the way shadows grow. Silently, in the spaces where no one bothers to look. He carried chores instead of a surname, obligations instead of rights, and wounds that belonged to no one but him. Yet the harshest burden was the one he never asked for. The invisible mark of being the Lord's illegitimate son. The word itself was never spoken near him, but it lived in the tension that followed him down every hallway. It echoed in the looks that lingered too long, in the doors that closed too quickly, in the way nobles avoided saying his name as if it were a stain on their tongues. Still, even in that bleak existence, there was Alara. She had been the only bright thing in his lonely childhood. The girl who had found him sitting alone behind the stables and treated him as if he weren't a mistake someone regretted making. As the years passed, she became the single piece of proof that kindness still existed in a world that had none for him. When everything else tried to crush whatever identity he had, she rebuilt it with gestures so small and sincere that he carried them like treasures. But light, he learned early, never shines without inviting shadows. Life inside the estate trained him to endure cruelty with clenched teeth. He watched nobles smile sweetly in public and spit venom in private. He watched servants with too much power pick on the ones with none. He stood on the border of both worlds, too noble to belong below, too illegitimate to belong above. The only thing he owned was silence. One afternoon, when Kale was no longer a boy but not yet a man, the weight of that silence became unbearable. Two older servants cornered him inside the stable, their voices low with the confidence of men who knew they could do whatever they pleased. A horse had escaped its stall that morning, nearly injuring a visiting lord. Someone needed to take the blame. And who better than the bastard everyone preferred to forget? "Say it was you," one demanded. "You're used to getting punished," the other added with a smirk. Kyle refused. He knew what happened when he accepted faults that were not his. But refusal came with its own price. The blows were not loud enough to draw attention. Fists to the gut, an elbow to the ribs, a shove that sent him stumbling into a wooden beam. The stench of hay and sweat mixed with the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. He tried to defend himself, but they were grown men, and he was just a half-starved shadow trying to stay upright. The beating stopped only when a small but fierce voice cut through the air. "Leave him alone." Alara stood in the doorway, fists balled tight, fury glowing like fire in her eyes. She was no threat to them, thin, young, and trembling with adrenaline, but something in her expression forced the men to back away as if the weight of their own shame had suddenly doubled. Kyle hadn't heard anyone speak for him in years. Not like that. Not with that kind of fierce honesty. The servants muttered and slipped out of the stable before anyone else could see them. When they were gone, Kale sank to his knees, breathing hard. Alara rushed to him, cupping his bruised jaw with trembling hands. "Why didn't you call for help?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked away. No one would have come. She shook her head with a stubbornness that softened him more than any kindness ever had. "I would have." Those 4 words broke something open in him, something he had spent years burying to survive. She helped him stand, wiping the blood from his lip with the edge of her apron, ignoring the stains it left behind. Every touch was gentle, careful, as if she were tending to something precious instead of someone the world valued so little. Her anger wasn't for herself. It was for him. It was the first time Kale had felt protected by anyone. When she finally left, Kale remained alone in the stable, surrounded by dust motes floating in the golden haze of sunset. The pain in his ribs throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. An ache made not of hurt, but of yearning. He realized then that her kindness was not something he could repay with simple gratitude. It demanded something far deeper. He drew a slow breath, tasting blood and cold air, and closed his eyes. In that quiet, abandoned place, Kyle made a vow. Not spoken aloud, but carved into the very core of who he was, a vow that would outlive bruises, insults, and every cruelty thrown at him. He swore that Alara would never stand alone. He swore that no one would harm her as long as he could still draw breath. He swore that he would protect her smile even if it cost him every shred of himself. It was a bold oath for someone with no power, a dangerous oath for someone with no claim, a forbidden oath for someone with no place in the world. But he carried it into every morning that followed, and it would shape the man he would become. The estate had always been divided in two, the part everyone could see, and the part everyone tried to forget. Kyle belonged to the second, but everything changed the day the heir returned home. His arrival rippled through the halls like a shift in the wind, subtle at first, then unmistakable, then impossible to ignore. Kyle sensed it before he even saw him. The air tightened. Servants hurried with a nervousness he had never seen in them. The housekeeper inspected every corner of the main hall 3 times, wiping imaginary dust from polished banisters. The steward barked orders louder than usual, as if trying to prove he retained some authority in the presence of the true successor. Even the lord of the estate, a man carved from stone, seemed more rigid, more cautious, more aware of the eyes that would judge how he welcomed the son everyone expected him to be proud of. Cale was carrying a stack of firewood to the upper floor when the doors opened. The heir entered like someone who believed every room existed for his sake. He walked with confidence sharpened by privilege, his shoulders broad, his posture perfect, his expression composed in that elegant way nobles learned from birth. His boots didn't make a sound, yet every step echoed. Sunlight from the grand windows hit his hair, just enough to outline him like a painting meant to adorn the great hall. His name was Ronan, though Cale hadn't spoken it aloud in years. They were nearly the same age, but worlds apart. Ronan had inherited tutors, a regal education, the respect of the nobility, and a future laid out for him like gold brick on a royal path. Cale had inherited whispers, a cold room in the servants' wing, and the constant reminder that he was tolerated, not accepted. Ronan scanned the hall with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He exchanged polite greetings with the noble guests gathered to celebrate his return. But when his gaze finally drifted to Kyle, something darker flickered there. Something sharp. Something old. Something that had been planted years before, and had grown with him. And Cale felt it like a blade sliding back into a sheath. Ronan hadn't forgotten. Cale bowed quickly, lowering his head in a way he never had to practice. The weight of Ronan's attention followed him until he disappeared around a corner. Kyle exhaled slowly, the tightness in his chest refusing to ease. Later that day, as Kyle worked outside repairing a fence damaged by the storm, he heard footsteps approaching. Alara appeared from behind the orchard trees, carrying a basket full of apples freshly picked. Her hair blew softly in the breeze, her eyes warm with the same kindness she had shown him since childhood. "You're working too much again," she said gently. "You should rest before the rain returns." He offered her a faint smile. "There's always more to do." She tilted her head, studying him. "You seem tense today." "Ronan returned," he said, trying to sound indifferent. Her expression shifted instantly. Not fear, not disapproval, but something complicated. A memory. A story she had kept buried. She placed the basket down and sat beside him on the fence, the wood creaking under their combined weight. "He was always difficult," she said carefully, "even when we were children." Cale remembered all too well. Ronan had been the sun around which the household revolved. Whatever he did was praised. Whatever he broke was forgiven. And whenever he looked at Cale, it was with the contempt of someone staring at a misplaced stain in their perfect portrait. But the worst part wasn't Ronan's arrogance. It was how he looked at Alara. Even as a child, the heir had envied the small piece of her heart Cale possessed. Even then, jealousy simmered beneath Ronan's polished manners. Cale had always been terrified that Ronan's attention would turn into obsession, because the heir was the kind of person who hated losing anything he believed was his. "Have you spoken to him?" Alara asked. "No," Cale said. "And I'd rather keep it that way." She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the mansion where Ronan's silhouette moved behind the curtains of an upper window. "Be careful," she whispered. "He hasn't changed." But she was wrong. Ronan had changed. He had grown more powerful, more charismatic, more dangerous. He had returned home with the confidence of someone who had learned to manipulate courts and aristocrats alike. And when he looked at Cale again during dinner service, the rivalry that once existed between them sharpened into something new. Possession. Ronan's gaze flicked between Cale and Alara. Then a slow, calculating smile curved his lips. Cale felt his stomach drop. The heir hadn't been home for a full day, yet already he had recognized the bond Cale and Alara shared, and already he hated it. The storm outside began to roll across the sky, dark and heavy. But the real storm was the one forming inside the estate walls. From the moment Ronan stepped back into the estate, the air seemed to bend around him. It wasn't only his presence. It was the authority he wore like a second skin, the arrogance sharpened by years among nobles who fed his ego, and the cold disdain he reserved for the one person he believed should not exist: Cale. For a few days, the tension built quietly, like a storm gathering behind distant hills. Cale tried to stay invisible, working in the stables, the gardens, anywhere Ronan's shadow didn't reach. But the heir was a hunter by nature, and Cale, no matter how hard he tried to disappear, had something Ronan wanted: Alara's attention. The first clash came not with fists or shouting, but with a simple, calculated humiliation. It happened late afternoon, when the sun dipped low and the courtyard glowed gold. Alara had finished her tasks and stopped near the well to share a few words with Kyle before returning to her quarters. She handed him a small cloth bundle. "I saved you a piece of sweetbread," she said softly. "You skipped supper again." Kyle managed a faint, grateful smile. "Thank you." What neither of them saw was Ronan approaching from the arched walkway above. He watched them from the shadows, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the way Cale's expression softened only for her. He waited until the perfect moment, until Cale unwrapped the cloth, before descending the steps with slow, deliberate steps. "Well," Ronan said, loud enough for the surrounding servants to hear. "How touching." Alara stiffened. Cale straightened, but stayed silent. Ronan walked closer, hands clasped behind his back, adopting the posture of a judge about to pass sentence. He glanced at the sweetbread in Cale's hands, then at Alara. "Is this why you were always so eager to run errands near the stables?" Ronan asked her. "To bring treats to the bastard boy?" Cale felt the word like a slap. Alara's face flushed with embarrassment and outrage. "Don't call him that," she said through clenched teeth. Ronan turned his gaze to her fully. "You forget your place." "No," she replied, voice trembling but steady. "You forget yours." The courtyard fell silent. Even the servants paused mid-task. Ronan's eyes darkened, but he smiled. A slow, venomous smile. "My place is heir to this estate." "His place," he said, looking at Cale, "is whatever scraps this household allows him." Cale swallowed, keeping his hands at his sides. He had endured insults all his life, but Alara hadn't, and Ronan knew exactly what he was doing, using her as the blade, Cale as the wound. He stepped closer to Cale, invading his space with a confidence born of privilege. "Tell me, Cale," Ronan said softly. "Is this what you've reduced yourself to? Living off a girl's pity?" Anger flared in Cale's chest, sharp and hot. Not because of the insult, he had heard worse, but because Ronan had spoken Alara's kindness as if it were something dirty. "I don't need pity," Cale said quietly, "and she owes you nothing." Ronan's smile vanished. His voice dropped, cold as winter. "You speak as though you are equal to me." Cale didn't flinch. "I don't claim equality, only dignity." Ronan stepped even closer, so close their foreheads nearly touched. "You have none," Ronan whispered. The words were meant to break something inside him. Instead, they hardened it. Alara moved between them, her small frame blocking Ronan's path. "Stop this," she said fiercely. "Both of you." But Ronan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Cale, as if Alara's presence only added fuel to the fire. "You should be thanking me," Ronan said. "I've returned, and now this estate can finally restore order." Cale's voice was steadier than he felt. "Order built on cruelty isn't order." Ronan laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Look at you, a servant boy lecturing me on morality. You forget that everything you have comes from my family's charity." Cale's hands curled into fists. "Charity?" he asked. "Charity is giving something freely, not using it to chain someone." For the first time, Ronan's composure cracked. His eyes flashed with something raw, jealousy, rage, old wounds he refused to admit. Before he could reply, Alara spoke again, this time more quietly. "Why are you doing this, Ronan? You weren't always like this?" Ronan turned his gaze to her, and the shift was frightening. His expression tightened, not from shame, but from possessiveness. "You should not be speaking to him," Ronan said. "And who decides that?" she asked. "I do," he said. "Because you will belong to my household one day." Kyle inhaled sharply. Alara recoiled. Ronan's voice dropped lower. "You were always meant to be mine." Kyle stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between them. Ronan's smirk returned, because he had expected exactly that reaction. "There it is," Ronan murmured. "The bastard thinks he can protect what he has no right to touch." Kyle didn't shout. He didn't push. He simply said the one truth neither of them wanted to acknowledge. "She is not yours." Ronan's smile vanished completely. The courtyard held its breath. In that moment, the rivalry that had simmered since childhood ignited fully, no longer hidden, no longer restrained. It was the beginning of the war between brothers. Alara had always lived in the quiet space between two worlds, close enough to the noble estate to hear its whispers, but far enough from privilege to remain untouched by its promises. She knew who she was. She knew where she stood. And she had never questioned the lines drawn around her life. Until the day Ronan returned and the fragile balance shattered beneath her feet. For years, she had moved through the estate as someone everyone recognized, but few truly saw. She wasn't invisible like Cale, but she wasn't important like Ronan. She existed in the soft middle ground, helpful, gentle, trustworthy, the kind of girl nobles called sweet, while expecting her to carry burdens heavier than her own dreams. But things changed the moment Ronan laid eyes on her again. She felt it in the charged silence that stretched between them, in the way his gaze lingered too long, too possessively, as if trying to reclaim something he thought he had been owed. And she felt it even stronger in the way Cale's shoulders tightened whenever Ronan approached, as if preparing himself for a blow he couldn't yet see but instinctively sensed. Alara hated the tension, hated being the spark that could ignite a fire she never intended to start. She had grown up with both boys, one who had everything and one who had nothing, and she cared for them in different ways. But Cale was the one who had stayed, the one who had listened to her stories by the river, the one who had made her laugh when the world seemed cold, the one who never used his pain as a weapon or his pride as a shield. She didn't know when affection had turned into something deeper. It had happened slowly, silently, like a seed rooting beneath soil before anyone notices a sprout. But she felt it now, unmistakably, in the ache that formed in her chest whenever she saw Cale brace himself for Ronan's cruelty. And she felt a different kind of ache when she saw Ronan's jealousy sharpen, turning him into a version of himself she barely recognized. The worst part was the guilt. No matter what she did, someone was hurt. If she smiled at Kyle, Ronan's eyes darkened. If she spoke kindly to Ronan, Cale's jaw tightened. If she tried to avoid both, they somehow collided anyway. The world she had always known, steady, predictable, unremarkable, was cracking beneath the weight of two men who saw her as a turning point in their own long, painful history. One afternoon, she tried to find peace by escaping into the orchards where the trees grew thick and the air smelled of apples and earth. She carried a basket on her hip, pretending she was working, but her mind was far from chores. She didn't hear footsteps behind her until someone gently spoke her name. Elara. Kyle. She turned, heart tugging, and saw him standing beneath the shade of a tall oak. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting fragments of gold across his face. He looked uneasy, his hands flexing at his sides as if unsure whether to reach for her or hide them. "I didn't mean to follow you," Cale said softly, "but I needed to make sure you were all right." She set the basket down, trying to smile, but her voice wavered. "I don't know what to do anymore. Everything feels wrong." Cale stepped closer. Not too close. He never did anything to frighten or pressure her, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "It's not your fault," he said. But she shook her head. "I'm the one standing between you and Ronan. I'm the one he keeps using to hurt you. And he won't stop." Cale's jaw tightened. "I can handle him." "That's not the point," she whispered, lowering her gaze. "I don't want you to be hurt because of me." He reached out instinctively, but stopped his hand midair, pulling it back as if unsure he had the right. "Elara, he doesn't hate me because of you. He hates me because of what I am." She lifted her eyes to his. "And what are you?" For a moment, he couldn't answer. She stepped forward and touched his chest gently, right where his heartbeat thudded through his shirt. "You are not a mistake, Kyle. You are not a burden. You are not what they call you." His breath trembled. "You are good," she said, "and strong, and kind. And if Ronan can't see that, it's his blindness, not yours." The words sank into him like light piercing through a locked room. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the orchard. "Elara." "Ronan." He emerged from between the trees, immaculate as always, yet his eyes burned with something wild. When he saw her standing close to Cale, something inside him snapped, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to silence the birds above and make the air feel colder. "I've been looking for you," Ronan said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "We need to talk." Elara stepped back, caught between them like a leaf in opposing winds. Cale didn't move. He simply watched Ronan with steady eyes, guarding her without words. Ronan's gaze flicked between them, and the jealousy in his expression sharpened into something dangerously akin to resolve. "Elara," he said again, quieter. "Come with me." She froze, and in that moment she understood, with heartbreaking clarity. No matter what choice she made now, or later, one of them would fall deeper into the darkness, and the other would rise. Not because she wanted it, not because she asked for it, but because the world had placed her between two brothers whose fates were already intertwined in ways she could not untangle. The days that followed were not peaceful ones. There was a heaviness in the estate, a tension that clung to the air like smoke after a fire, visible to anyone willing to look closely, ignored by those who preferred comfort over truth. Ilara tried to move through her duties as if nothing had changed, but every step she took felt watched. Every errand brought her into the path of either Kale or Ronan, and every encounter pulled the invisible rope between them tighter. And Kale felt it, deeply, dangerously. He noticed the way Ronan hovered near her whenever she walked through the courtyard, offering compliments too polished to be genuine. He noticed the way Ronan dismissed servants harshly if they delayed relaying messages to her. He noticed, most of all, the way Ronan's eyes narrowed whenever he caught Kale anywhere near her. Kale tried to keep his distance, not for Ronan's sake, but for hers. He didn't want to feed Ronan's jealousy or drag her into the battlefield she had never chosen. But staying away didn't help. It made things worse. Ronan interpreted Kale's silence as fear, and fear emboldened him. The storm finally broke during the harvest festival preparations. Ilara had been assigned to prepare decorations in the southern wing, long garlands of autumn flowers woven between wooden pillars and lanterns. Kale had been tasked with hauling crates of supplies nearby. The two worked within the same space, close enough to feel each other there, far enough not to raise suspicion. At least, that was the hope. Kale had just lifted a heavy crate onto a platform when he heard Ronan's voice echo down the hall. Not loud, but sharp. "Ilara, a word." Kale froze. He set the crate down slowly, silently, as instinct told him something was wrong. He stepped closer to the half-open door of the hall, keeping to the shadows. Ilara turned, wiping petals from her apron. "Is something the matter?" Ronan stepped closer to her, too close, with an expression Kale had seen before in men who believed they were entitled to everything they desired. "You've been avoiding me," Ronan said. "I've been busy," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Busy with Kale, I hear." Her breath caught. "That's not true." "It is," Ronan murmured, voice dropping. "And I won't tolerate it." She stepped back, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Ronan, I don't belong to you." He reached for her wrist. That was when Kale moved. He burst through the door and crossed the room so fast Ronan startled. Kale grabbed Ronan's wrist before it reached her, his grip firm, but controlled. "Don't touch her," Kale said quietly. The room went still. Ronan's face twisted slowly into a smirk, not amused, but venomous. "You think you can stop me?" "Yes," Kale said, "if it means protecting her." Ronan yanked his hand away, stepping back as the fury in his expression darkened. "You're overstepping. And you're trying to force someone who doesn't want you," Kale said. Ronan's composure shattered. "You have no right," Ronan snapped. "You are nothing, a mistake my father should have buried, and yet you stand here speaking to me as if we are equals." Kale didn't flinch. "We're not equals. You're right. You have power, status, everything I never had." Ronan smirked triumphantly. "But I have something you don't," Kale said. "And what's that?" Ronan mocked. "A promise." Ronan's smile faltered. Kale stepped in front of Ilara, shielding her. "I swore to protect her long before you even noticed she existed, and I won't break that oath." Ronan's jaw clenched so tight his teeth clicked. "You think she needs your protection?" Ilara took a shaky breath. "Ronan, please." "Quiet," he snapped. Kale stepped forward so suddenly that Ronan stumbled back. "She speaks when she chooses," Kale said. The heir's face flushed with humiliation, the kind of humiliation noblemen never forgot. "You want to fight?" Ronan hissed. "Fine. Let's give everyone a show." Before Kale could react, Ronan shoved him, hard. Kale staggered but didn't fall. Ronan shoved him again. Kale still didn't fall. Ronan's breathing quickened, the look in his eyes turning desperate, unhinged. "Fight back," he demanded. Cale didn't move. Ronan raised his hand to strike him. And that was when fate intervened. The lantern rope Ronan had knocked loose during the shoving came crashing down. It struck the wall beside Cale, shattering glass and sending flames spilling across the dried festival garlands. The fire spread fast. Too fast. Servants screamed. People rushed in. Chaos erupted. Ilara grabbed Cale's arm. "We have to go!" But Ronan stood frozen, staring at the fire as if realizing too late that he had caused it. Kyle didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ronan's arm and pulled him out of the hall before the flames reached them. For one brief second, Ronan looked at Cale not with hatred, but with confusion and shame. Cale had saved him, but he didn't thank him. He couldn't. Not while Ilara stood between them, eyes full of fear and loyalty, directed at the wrong brother in Ronan's mind. As smoke filled the corridors and the festival hall burned behind them, Ronan made a silent vow. If Cale wanted a war, then Ronan would give him one. The fire was extinguished before it consumed the entire hall, but its damage lingered, not just in the charred beams and blackened garlands, but in the shaken hearts of everyone who had witnessed the chaos. Whispers spread not about the flames, but about the three figures who had emerged from the smoke, the air trembling with rage, the servant boy with soot on his hands, and the young woman who clung to them both for very different reasons. For Cale, the fire had revealed something he had long known. Ronan's temper was not just dangerous, it was unpredictable. And unpredictability was a weapon more powerful than a title. It could destroy reputations, families, even entire futures. The Lord of the Estate summoned Ronan privately after the incident, and though no one heard what was said behind the thick wooden doors, the results were visible. Ronan walked out with a storm in his chest and a command in his eyes. He was going to crush Cale. But Cale had changed too. He had grown tired of hiding in corners, tired of shrinking himself to avoid Ronan's wrath, tired of pretending that his silence preserved peace. The oath he had carried since childhood, to protect Ilara, had taken root deeper than fear. And when Ronan threatened that oath, something unbreakable rose inside him. It happened 3 days after the fire. Cale was repairing the fencing around the lower fields when a group of stable boys approached with nervous glances. One of them, a lanky teenager with trembling hands, handed Cale a folded parchment. "From the steward," he said. Cale unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was sharp and elegant, Ronan's. "Report to the training courtyard at first bell. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to comply will result in dismissal from the estate." Cale closed the letter with a calmness that wasn't calm at all. Around him, the boys exchanged wary looks. They had heard the rumors. Everyone had. Cale was being dragged into a confrontation. The next morning, the day dawned in shades of cold gray. Mist clung to the training courtyard, softening the edges of the wooden dummies lined in a row. Ronan stood in the center, dressed in noble training attire, a wooden practice sword in hand. The lord and a handful of minor nobles stood at the edges, observing quietly. And Ilara was there too. At the far end of the courtyard, her hands clasped tightly, fear shadowing her features. When Cale stepped onto the sand, a hush fell. Ronan smiled, calm and triumphant. "You finally showed up." Kyle didn't bow. "You summoned me." "I summoned a servant," Ronan corrected. "You came because you know your place." Kyle met his eyes. "I came because I know yours." A flicker of anger crossed Ronan's face, but he hid it well. He gestured to the wooden swords resting on the rack. "Pick one." Cale didn't move. Ronan walked closer, dragging the wooden blade across the sand. "I said pick one." Cale finally spoke. "I won't fight you with a blade." A ripple of surprise moved through the observers. Ronan laughed. "Of course you won't. You're afraid. Kyle's voice remained steady. I'm not afraid of fighting. I'm afraid of what it will do to you. Ronan's laughter died instantly. Kale continued. You don't want a duel. You want a spectacle. You want to humiliate me in front of them. He gestured toward the nobles watching. But you don't understand something. He stepped forward, closer than he ever had before. I don't play your games anymore. Ronan's jaw twitched. You don't get to decide that. Kale shook his head. I do, because I'm no longer hiding from you. Ronan lunged without warning. The wooden sword sliced through the air, aimed at Kale's ribs. Kale stepped back just in time, the blade grazing his shirt. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply dodged, sidestepped, deflected Ronan's fury with nothing but instinct. Ronan swung again, harder. Kale blocked the strike with his forearm, wincing at the impact but refusing to retreat. Every blow Ronan delivered only fed the watching eyes, and fed Ronan's growing desperation. He wanted Kale on the ground. He wanted him beaten, broken, crushed, but Kale didn't fall. Breathing hard, Ronan stepped back. Fight me! Kale didn't move. Ronan charged again, and this time Kale caught the wooden sword midair. The courtyard gasped as he wrenched it free from Ronan's hands and threw it aside. Enough, Kale said quietly. Ronan stumbled, stunned. You dare... Kale's voice cut through the tension. I won't raise a weapon against my brother. The courtyard froze. The word brother sliced through the air sharper than any blade. Ronan's eyes widened, first with shock, then with something like deep, buried hatred. Kale stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't have to see me as family, but I will not become your enemy, not unless you touch her again. Ronan's fury snapped like a cracking bone. This is because of her? He spat. You think she cares for you? You think she'll choose a bastard over me? Kale didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Ronan lunged at him with bare hands, a reckless, wild attack, but Kale caught his wrists, stopping him cold. The two stood locked in a battle of strength and emotion, neither willing to yield. Around them, nobles whispered, servants stared, and the Lord himself watched with unreadable eyes. Finally, Kale released Ronan and stepped back. Stop forcing what she doesn't want, Kyle said softly, or you will force me into a war I never wanted to fight. Ronan's breath shook with rage, but a sliver of fear glinted in his eyes. Because for the first time in their lives, Kyle wasn't standing below him. He was standing equal. The courtyard emptied slowly after the confrontation, leaving only whispers swirling in the morning mist. Ronan stormed away without a backward glance, fury stiffening every line of his body. The nobles followed him, murmuring in hushed voices, unsure whether to admire Kale's restraint or condemn his defiance. Alara remained frozen, eyes wide, heart pounding in her chest as she replayed every moment. Kale catching the blade, Kale speaking the word brother, Ronan unraveling in front of them all. But the man with the coldest expression that morning was the lord of the estate. He had watched everything from the far side of the courtyard, arms crossed behind him, face unreadable. When Kyle finally turned to leave, the lord called his name. Kyle. A word. The tone was not angry. It was worse. Controlled. Kyle followed him into the study, a room filled with dark wood, maps of the estate, and books no one had touched in years. The door shut behind them with a heavy certainty, cutting off the outside world. The Lord gestured for Kale to stand near the window while he moved behind the desk. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, the Lord exhaled, sitting down slowly. You humiliated the heir today. Kale kept his eyes on the window. I didn't fight him. That is precisely why. The Lord's voice sharpened. Ronan looked like a child having a tantrum, and you looked like a man. Kale clenched his jaw. I didn't intend to. You did nothing wrong. The Lord's tone shifted unexpectedly, not warm, but heavy. But you have forced the truth to surface. Cale frowned. What truth? The Lord closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering years of silence into a single breath. When he opened them again, something inside him had cracked. Ronan is not my legitimate heir, he said. The words struck the room like lightning. Cale felt his breath catch. What do you mean? The Lord leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice low. Your mother was not the only woman I wronged. Ronan's mother was not my wife either. Cale stared at him, stunned. She was brought into the family by force, the Lord continued. Not love, not marriage. When she died, the elders of the household decided that for the family's reputation, Ronan would be declared legitimate. They forged documents, silenced witnesses, paid priests to rewrite records. And the world believed it. Kyle's hands trembled. Ronan, the golden boy, the heir, the one who despised Cale for being illegitimate, was living a lie. And me? Cale asked softly. What am I? The Lord looked away, shame flickering across his face, a rare, almost painful expression on a man who ruled his estate with iron certainty. You, he said, are the only child I fathered willingly. Silence throbbed through the room. Kyle felt sick, confused, betrayed, vindicated. His entire life had been built on the belief that he was the stain, the shameful secret, the unwanted mistake. But now... You knew, Kyle whispered, all these years. You knew, and you let them treat me like nothing? I had no choice, the Lord snapped. The council threatened to strip the estate from our bloodline. If I announced the truth, Ronan would be ruined, and the elders believed you had no right to rise above your place. Cale's jaw tightened. So you chose power over your sons. The Lord shut his eyes. I chose survival. Cale stepped back, breath unsteady. He didn't want to hear more. Didn't want this twisted revelation. Didn't want to feel pity for a father who had never claimed him. But the Lord stood up and placed a sealed envelope on the desk. Your mother wrote this before she died, he said. I kept it hidden. It was not safe before. It is now. Kyle stared at the envelope, as if it were a ghost. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. He opened it slowly, carefully, as if afraid the paper would crumble in his hands. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was gentle, uncertain, carrying the softness of someone who had loved without power. My son, if you are reading this, it means you survived the world I feared would swallow you. I want you to know that you were never a burden. I fought for you. I chose you. You were loved every day of my life, even when the world tried to silence that truth. Cale's vision blurred. I pray you will grow to be the man I always believed you could be. Not noble by title, but noble by heart. And I pray that one day you will find someone who sees you the way I saw you, with wonder and pride. Cale lowered the letter, tears burning in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he had proof that he had been wanted, loved, chosen. Ronan, on the other hand, had built his entire identity on a throne made of lies. The world shifted. Everything shifted. Kyle folded the letter with trembling hands and placed it against his chest. The Lord spoke again, quieter. Cale, what you do with this truth is now your choice. It could tear Ronan apart. It could tear the estate apart. Or it could finally set things right. Cale looked up, eyes filled with something new. Resolve, strength, a purpose born not from survival, but from truth. I won't use it to destroy him, Kyle said, but I won't let him destroy her. The Lord nodded slowly, and for the first time, Cale walked out of the room not as a shadow, but as the rightful son. The truth had a strange weight to it. It didn't crash into Cale like a wave, or ignite him like fire. It settled into him slowly, quietly, like embers glowing beneath ash, steady, undeniable, and warm enough to reshape everything he thought he understood about his life. He walked through the estate grounds with his mother's letter pressed against his chest, and for the first time, the shadows he passed through did not feel like they belonged to him. They belonged to the past. The moment he stepped outside the study, the world seemed sharper, clearer. The trees, the stones, the halls, they looked the same, but Kyle had changed. Every footstep carried the memory of what he had endured, and the truth of what he finally knew. And as he made his way toward the servants' wing, the person he wanted to find more than anything was Ilara. He found her at the edge of the orchard where they had spoken days earlier, her hands brushing petals from fallen blossoms, her expression distant. She saw him approaching and straightened, worry flickering across her features. "What happened?" she asked softly. "You look different." Cale swallowed, unable to form the words immediately. He handed her the folded letter. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. As she read, her breath hitched, her eyes filled, and her hand flew to her mouth. When she finished, she looked up with tears trembling on her lashes. "Cale, she loved you so much." He nodded, breath shaky. "I didn't know. I spent my whole life believing I was unwanted, that I was someone's mistake." His voice thickened. "But she fought for me." Ilara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him gently. He leaned into her embrace, letting the softness of her touch soothe the raw places inside him. When she pulled back, she held his face with both hands. "You were never a mistake," she said, "and you never will be." Before Cale could respond, a voice cut across the orchard. "Well, isn't this touching?" Ronan stood among the shadows of the trees, his expression pale, strained, and cracked. He had not slept. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion and something far more dangerous. He held a parchment in his hand, the kind that bore the family seal. Cale's stomach tightened. The Lord must have told him something. Ronan stepped closer, his voice colder than winter. "Did you enjoy your conversation with our father?" Cale didn't answer. Ronan held up the parchment. "He told me everything." Ilara inhaled sharply. Cale steadied himself. "Then you know the truth." "Truth?" Ronan laughed, a brittle, unhinged sound. "What truth? That my entire life is a lie? That the estate I was raised to inherit doesn't belong to me? That you, the bastard who lived in the shadows, are the one he actually wanted?" Kyle took a slow breath. "I didn't ask for this, and I don't want the estate." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Liar." Kyle shook his head. "I only want to live in peace, to protect the people I care about." Ronan's gaze flicked to Ilara. His voice dropped to something dangerous. "This is all because of her." "No," Kyle said firmly. "This began long before." "Everything began with her," Ronan snapped. "You think I don't see it? She looks at you the way people used to look at me, with hope, with admiration, with love." Ilara stepped forward. "Ronan, don't," he said sharply, voice breaking. "Don't pretend you don't feel something for him." Cale moved between them instinctively. Ronan stared at them, chest heaving, eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. "All my life, I fought to be worthy, to be seen, and still, his gaze dropped. He chose you." Cale felt something twist painfully in his chest. For the first time, Ronan didn't look like an enemy. He looked like a boy abandoned by the world, the same way Cale once felt. You can still be part of this family, Kale said gently. The truth doesn't erase who you are, or what you've lived through. Ronan looked up, stunned. Kale continued, voice steady. But you need to stop trying to force people into places they don't want to be, especially her. Ronan's gaze shifted to Alara. She stepped forward slowly, voice soft but strong. Ronan, you deserve someone who loves you honestly. Not someone who fears you. Not someone you try to claim. Someone who chooses you freely. Ronan swallowed hard. And you choose him. Alara nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I do. Silence. For a long moment, Ronan didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he lowered the parchment to his side. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Then I have lost. Kyle shook his head. You haven't lost. Not if you stop fighting battles that aren't yours to win. Ronan looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time without hatred behind his eyes. Only exhaustion, pain, and acceptance. Finally, Ronan nodded, defeated, but calmer. Then I'll leave the estate for a while. I need to think. Kale extended a hand. Ronan stared at it for a long, silent moment, then took it. Not as brothers by blood, but as men who finally saw each other clearly. Ronan walked away slowly, fading into the orchard path until only silence remained. Alara turned to Kale, her eyes soft, full of something deep and unwavering. So, what happens now? Kale stepped closer, touching her cheek gently. Now, he said, we build something new. Her breath trembled. Together? A soft smile touched his lips. Always. She leaned into him, and Kyle kissed her, gently first, then with the certainty of a man who had carried a promise for years, without knowing if he'd ever be allowed to keep it. The shadows of his past had finally dissolved. His mother's love had finally reached him, and the future, for the first time, belonged to him.